one of your big themes here at the conference has been your insistence on the fact that the words we use and the language we express ourselves in are really determinant in our, not just our attitude towards the natural world, but how we behave. Maybe we should talk a little bit about that, about why you think that's so important. You know, a lot of your life, one of your big intellectual challenges has been this idea of reconciling indigenous wisdom and ways of knowing with the Western scientific approaches, something that's very difficult to reconcile, but that's been your life's work. And you've often used the term being bicognitive. Now you're sort of talking about being plurilingual. So maybe let's explore that a bit.
Well, obviously it's complicated to talk about the limits of a language in that language, but that also makes it interesting. For me, it started to become clear when I wrote Intelligence in Nature, and I was doing this 15 years ago. And so English is my mother tongue. I also speak French. I know that when you go from one language to another, things don't necessarily translate. So I think that experience of having grown up with several languages and then Spanish and then a bit of German, I'm not bragging. Actually, I feel my head's relatively small. I know some people who can speak a whole bunch of languages. But anyway, as I was writing Intelligence in Nature, I still had the reflex of most people of just to think that the words that are in our mother tongue are normal. They're, so intelligence. Well, everybody knows what intelligence is, or we think we do. Or, okay, you can look in the dictionary and there's a definition. And all right, so my book is going to be about intelligence in nature. But the more I started looking into the subject, the problem with the word emerged fairly quickly. So intelligence is a word that comes from the Latin, interlegere, to choose between. So it's in Western tongues. And if you look in the dictionary, the definition of the word is often in exclusively human terms, which means that it can't really be applied to other species if we're strict with words. So then you think, well, wait a second, how come intelligence is in exclusively human terms? Well, you look into it and you realize that there's this thing in Western cultures, human exclusivity, this whole idea that humans have things that the others don't, and there's like a kind of a long shopping list that Western thinkers have tended, especially modern Western thinkers, to line up as being what makes us above all other species. And you think, but hold on, what is this above other species business? I mean, we're mammals after all. So where is the above? Well, we say there's a whole list of things that humans do and that other species don't do. And intelligence is one of them, that over the centuries, Western thinkers have said humans have intelligence and the others have instinct.
Well, but those goalposts have moved quite a bit, right? Because a lot of recent research on animal, I mean, when you wrote your book, it was early, but now there's been a lot to, yeah.
But when a Japanese researcher showed that a slime mold could solve a maze and used the word intelligence in Nature magazine in 2002, all the Western commentators said, wait, you can't use the word intelligence for a single cell of slime.
I remember he said that if he used the word cleverness, they were better with
Smart.
it. Smart.
So it was obvious that there was this human supremacist thing lurking in the word intelligence. Okay, and then I found that it was also lurking in the word nature. So that if you look in the dictionary, nature is defined as the phenomena of the physical world, plants, animals, and the landscape, as opposed to humans and human creations. This is the Oxford English Dictionary definition of the word. As opposed to humans and human creations. Nature is everything that is not human. And anthropologists have pointed out that this is a concept specific to Western cultures. So you go to the Amazon and ask people there how they say everything that is not human. They say, no, we think plants and animals are people like us. Mm-hmm. We don't have this idea, everything that is not human. So then you think, okay, no, so let's wind the tape back. So English is my mother tongue. Nature, we know I like nature. Nature's plants and animals. Okay, but it means everything that is not human. Yeah, it's kind of a weird concept. I thought that nature was a natural concept. I thought nature existed. I like nature. I'm a friend of nature. But actually, the concept is this weird concept.
And so,
that
what
puts
do
a
you think about how
distance.
to transcend, to deal with that? Because as you were saying, the only languages we have are the ones that we are raised with. So, is there any
Easy.
escape?
Yeah, there's escape. Like, for example, I tend to not use the word nature. I tend to say plants and animals, or the living world, or all living organisms, or the biosphere,
Or the web of life? Or
the web of life. There's a whole all kinds of ways of talking, but that. So then, both intelligence and nature are centered on humans, but in opposed ways. In fact, intelligence and nature, if you're strict with words, is a contradiction in terms, because intelligence excludes non-humans and nature excludes humans. But that just shows that our categories or our concepts have these blind angles. So I think this is interesting, but it means that if we want to move forward with understanding what we would call intelligence in nature, or let's just say the full capacities of all living organisms, if we want to understand that, doing away with concepts that put a difference between us and the other species seems like a good move. In other words, okay, if intelligence is problematic because it's irremediably a human exclusivity, forget about it. We need a new concept. If nature is problematic because it also excludes humans and puts a difference between us and other species, then we don't need it. We can use alternatives. The point is to do away with these artificial barriers that we've erected in our minds and in our vocabularies. And surely there must be a link between, so we put ourselves above all other species a priori, and actually on what criteria has never really been clear. There's no physico-chemical difference between us and these other species. Why is it that, so it's actually so like this God-given right, that sort of God said that humans are in God's image and all the rest are just there for us to use? I don't know. I'm an agnostic.
That's
but
more a monotheistic problem. Yeah,
well, but I think that there are monotheistic roots to this, and there's probably this kind of seeing humans apart from the other species might actually be the roots of monotheism too. So I think it works both ways.
There is a sort of more underground philosophical tradition in the West of panpsychism, this idea that consciousness permeates everything in the universe, even inanimate, what we think of as inanimate, which is probably another problematic word. So,
But you note that the let's call it the capitalist world that has been established, this sort of huge industry, market-driven, worldwide distribution, containers, plastic objects made all over the place. That world is a world that has considered plants and animals as objects, not as subjects. So there's humans on one hand, they're the subjects, they're the consumers, and all the rest are objects. We can wrap them in plastic and sell them. And that's what's going on. So this view that humans are somehow above all the rest and can do with all the rest what they want is the world we live in.
And do you think that this struggle to rethink language or reshape language, so that this is a linguistic battle that could actually have effects in the real world of commerce and of
That's a good question. But obviously, if all one had to do was think clearly and then the world would change.
the Marxist mistake,
It's more complicated than that. So it may not be sufficient, but it's necessary. And actually the link, it's really interesting, the link between the language in which we think and our acts. Actually, people tell me that I'm not the same person in French or in English. And apparently with bilingual people, a lot of people who know them say this, is that because you aren't the same in the other language, simply because it's not the same vessel. It's like, a glass of wine in a tiny little thing, or the same wine in a big glass where you can get so it's not just the wine, it's also the glass in which you drink it. And that's how I see a language.
So, Jeremy, the idea of your work having come at a time when very few people were open to this idea of intelligence in nature. Forgive the use of those two terms, but it was the title of your book.
Right.
Have you seen progress in terms of the mainstream scientific establishment, in terms of catching up with the ideas that you expressed in that book? And do you see hope there, or do you think it's just partial penetration and much more needs to be done?
Yeah, actually, the funny thing was that obviously my experience is specific. It's to the quirk of what I lived, but the quirk of what I lived was publishing Intelligence in Nature in 2005. The book was mainly ignored, like it was non-reviewed and so on. Then in the months that followed, and then the years that followed, the examples of intelligence in nature reported by scientists kept on cropping up. New ones, like some have said there's been a revolution in vegetal biology since 2005. I mean, the timing was almost perfect, not for book sale, because the book didn't sell, but it's like all that science has produced since then has been an enormous confirmation of the capacities, the surprising capacities of plants, of unicellulars, of fungi, of trees and networks of trees and interspecies communications. And at this point, there's no articles on stupidity in nature and thousands of articles and bits of research on these surprising capacities of all kinds of species, including communication, learning, remembering, perceiving, even plants. They perceive, they smell, they hear. It's just been demonstrated that plants can hear, the sound of water and so on. So there's all this research that has unfolded in the last decade it's been like a snowball. So yeah, clearly it's been shifting, and it's funny how it happens, because for so long the subject of the intelligence of plants and so forth, this was almost like a taboo subject.
Well, hippie. It sounded like hippie nonsense, right?
Yeah, but now it's like everybody knows that plants are intelligent. So I'm really happy. These things usually take longer. Now I don't think there's any argument. I mean, yeah, people can actually say, oh, well, is the word intelligence appropriate for plants and so on? But actually plants are now on board. It's clear that they are sentient beings. They perceive, they communicate, they learn, they remember, they recognize one another, etc. All plants and animals are objects in the eye of the law, except some are starting to receive personhood. Except person is another one of these human-centered concepts. The first definition of the word, if you look in the dictionary, is a human being regarded as an individual. So by definition, this is what critics say. You can't grant personhood to other species because it doesn't make sense.
Although French is a weird one because it's person and no one.
Yeah, and the etymology, person in the Greek refers to a mask.
Right.
And a mask can apply to anybody. In other words, person is one of these complicated concepts, and it's probably going to get on the list of concepts that need to be avoided.
In your linguistic dictionary.
Getting down from the pedestal. We're going to have to drop that one too.
I think we just came up with your next writing project.
The list. Yeah.